is we're not tough enough. The truth is we want to do the right thing, but in order to do the right thing, as Lyndon Johnson said, you have to, in order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And you know, the younger generation, which elected Barack Obama, really would like us to pull together and be bipartisan, and so would the country. But it takes two to be bipartisan, and I think people would much rather have a really strong health care bill than they would worry about being bipartisan with a bunch of right-wing people who don't care as much about the country as they ought to. But let's talk about where we go from here. The Scott Brown election was incredibly interesting because it was, I mean, it wasn't so good for the Democrats, but it was also very interesting, and I'll tell you why. As you know, Democracy for America, which came from my campaign, is still run by my brother out of Burlington, and they, with a number of other progressive organizations, poll about every 2 or 3 weeks, because if there's 5 or 6 of them, they could each kick in $5,000 and do a pretty good national poll for that. And here's what they found when they polled in Massachusetts on election night. 18% of all the people who voted for Scott Brown for the United States Senate were Obama voters. That is, he would not have won without Obama voters. Secondly, of those people, 57% thought health care ought to have a public option, and 80% thought the bill didn't go far enough. Those are the ones that voted for Brown. Of the Obama Democrats that stayed home and didn't vote at all, 86% thought the bill didn't go far enough, and by 6 to 1 they thought they ought to have a public option in their bill. And the media has made much, especially the talking heads on cable, one of which I am from time to time, of this is a part of a populist rebellion. Well, it's a populist rebellion, but it's not a populist rebellion just on the right. It's a populist rebellion on the right and the center and the left, but it's manifested differently. On the right center, people can't wait to get out and vote and do bad things to the Democrats. On the left, our base has been demoralized. This is not the time to get demoralized. Anybody who thought that we were going to suddenly change America in one election cycle is wrong. It took a long time between the time that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat and the Civil Rights Bill was signed. That did not happen in one election cycle. And this is about our willingness to stick to it every single day. If the folks we sent to Washington don't do all the things we ask, then we still ought to be active. We can be active in the community, and some of these things are going to have to be done at the state level. Real campaign finance, the most extraordinary year running for governor of any I've ever seen in Vermont. 5 well-qualified candidates running on the Democratic side. That's the problem. There are 5, but they're well qualified. Imagine the Democrats being strong enough to have 5 really good candidates, any of whom could do a good job as governor. We have a great opportunity here. So there is a lot to be done, and there are differences to be made, and we need to make those differences. Change does not come from the top. We created the conditions for change in the last election. It was an extraordinary election. I'm going to tell you about it in a minute. But we have to continue now to create the conditions so that those folks can change. And that means encouraging them, and it also means calling them out when we don't think they're doing it right. So let me just talk for a second about the electoral nature of what happened in 2008, because it truly was a revolution. This is the first election in my lifetime, and Tim's as well, I think, anybody's in this room, where more people under the age of 35 voted than who voted who were over the age of 65. Barack Obama represents a new generation. It's part of why this has been so difficult in the last year or so. This under 35 generation is an extraordinary group. There really is a generational divide here. And like most great leaders, Obama's genius is not that he said, here's where we're going to go. What he did was understand and absorb the energy of this new generation and reflect it back, kind of like a parabolic mirror in articulate form. This is a new generation that has come to power. Now, they aren't in the halls of power yet, but they are responsible more than anybody else for who gets there and who doesn't. But that's not all. This generation is different than our generation. They are truly the boom echo, but their values are different than ours. But this country, these young people want to work with each other. Their central question to our generation is, can you stop fighting about the things you've been fighting about for 30 years and let us work together and find some solutions to things that we agree on? So this isn't just a change among the generation of Democrats that went out and voted for Barack Obama. In fact, this is the tough part for us. These kids aren't Democrats. They voted 63% for Barack Obama. They're not Democrats. They have turned away from the Republican Party because they don't like that. They grew up with all the people that the Republican Party is pointing their fingers at. They have friends who are gay. They have friends who are of different races and religions and ethnicities. And they all grew up together. And they live in the world that we hoped to build. We need to be tougher. If we believe in what we're doing, we ought to do what we said we would do, and then we will win elections again. But if we promise one thing and we don't deliver on it, we're not going to win re-elections, and that's not going to be very good for the country or for our children. I think the president's plan that he talked about during the campaign was brilliant, because I know there are constituencies, and in this room there's a fairly high percentage of people who want a single payer. There's nothing wrong with a single payer. A single payer, in fact, is the most efficient and effective way to deliver health care. Not only that, we actually have a single payer in this country. We have a single payer in this country that has 50 million people, and it's called Medicare. But Medicare, you can take it in any state you want. Everybody pays the same whether they're sick or not. You can't get excluded for pre-existing conditions. You can't be thrown out if you get sick. And if you lose your job, you don't lose your health insurance. Sounds to me like a pretty good policy. And you know what else we have in this country? This is astonishing. We have socialized medicine in this country. You know how many people are in the socialized system? 25 million. It's called the Veterans Administration. So all the people who defended America that the Republicans keep talking about. We need to be tougher. If we believe in what we're doing, we ought to do what we said we would do, and then we will win elections again. But if we promise one thing and we don't deliver on it, we're not going to win re-elections, and that's not going to be very good for the country or for our children. The employer-based system is probably not too good for our business community, but at least let's leave that aside. The art of politics is not just telling people who like something they can't have it anymore. Americans hate that. It is working with folks to change the system. Now, I never suspected for a moment that the Congress of the United States was going to pass health care reform. What I had hoped is that they would give us enough choices so that we could make the reforms ourselves by choosing the system that we wanted. And what we needed, the fight over the public option was not some fetish, as the Inside the Beltway columnist, smug columnist said. The fight over the public option was, do we get to choose? Who makes the choice? Shall we continue with a system where our employers, our insurance companies, and our government tell us what we have to do? Or will we get the choice? You can't blame the Democratic Senate. Pat Leahy is out there today, one of 8 senators who signed a letter asking the President and Harry Reid to use reconciliations at this time to get a public option through. So we can't beat up on ourselves so much. Let's give ourselves this. Let's look at it. Was 4 Democrats that did this and 40 Republicans that did this in the Senate, not, quote, the Democratic Party. But we still need to be tougher. They want to do the right thing. What we need is toughness to do the right thing. If you were to have used Medicare and Medicaid to expand, as we did, remember, 99% of the kids in this state either have private insurance or are eligible for Medicaid because of the Dr. Dinosaur program. We have universal health care for kids under 18 in this state. We did that 16 years ago, and it still works just fine. It'll work for the rest of the country. But we should have used Medicare and Medicaid for the basis of the expansion and the choices that our folks would get, because it would mean that 2 months after the president signed the bill, people would start getting insurance. The best cure for people who say a lot of things that aren't so and inflame the public and make them afraid is to do it. If you're sure it's the right thing to do, do it. We didn't think this thing through, and we needed to do that. Now look, there are 2 countries that deliver universal health care, the Dutch and the Swiss, entirely in the private sector. It can work. The problem is, if they do it, they can only do it by regulating the insurance industry, the health insurance industry, as if it's a public utility. Now, our insurance industry in this country is not about to be regulated like a public utility. Obviously, it's the most powerful lobby group in the Capitol. It just fought a president who got elected with a huge majority, and the Democratic Congress, which was overwhelmingly Democratic, to an absolute standstill. So what this bill has set us up to do is have a fight for 30 years with the insurance industry over every single regulation, and it's going to cost us billions of dollars that we don't need to spend. So I think there'll be some attempt to pass some things. I hope what we pass will be good things. If it's some modest insurance reform, I think that's great. So I am cautiously optimistic that something will pass. I am worried that what passes might not be so great, and I guess we're going to find out. Thank you very much.